The Intertech Group and the Zucker family are proud to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment.
Welcome to We the Women. This is our celebration of the 19th Amendment. Exactly 100 years ago, on August 18th, 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, giving women the right to vote. To celebrate, we'll be talking to women from around South Carolina, thought leaders, movers and shakers. We'll ask them about how they have used their voice and what they have done to contribute to our great democracy. Enjoy the conversation.
So we're joined today by Charleston County School District Superintendent Gerrita Postlewait. I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day, your very busy day, especially recently, to talk with me. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jenna.
So obviously the reason that we're doing this project is to talk to influential leaders in the Charleston area, specifically female leaders, about their experiences as we approach the anniversary of the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. So I would just kind of like to open it up, as I've done for a lot of these, and ask you, what does that mean to you when you reflect on your life and when you reflect on the 100th anniversary? What do you think about it, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's really important to pause and to be intentional about recalling the struggles that others went through in order for us to have these opportunities, because frankly, if someone hadn't pointed out that this is the 100th anniversary, I wouldn't have stopped to think through what opportunities I have that others haven't had. So it causes me to think about the opportunities that we have today to make changes that will have the same magnitude of significance for young girls, people who have been disenfranchised, who live at the margins, who haven't been able to participate in the mainstream. So I find it both humbling and motivating.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been in education for a long time.
I have.
This is your 5th year superintendent, I think, of Charleston County School District.
Right.
Tell me if I'm wrong. Okay.
Right.
But you also served for quite a long time as superintendent in Horry County.
Right.
And there's more, that's what stands out. But what made you first interested in going down this career path, and what made you passionate about pursuing education? Yeah,
I can. So I planned a different career, and my husband was in the military. He was deployed. And so I taught school for a year, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I enjoyed teaching school. My husband moved fairly frequently, so when we moved, I needed to find another job. It meant I taught at different levels in the school system. I had a chance to observe lots of different leadership styles in different cultures and contexts. And I always thought as a teacher that there were surely better ways to do some of these things that trickled down to the classroom. So then I was at the school leadership level, and I thought, my goodness, surely there's a better way to organize these responsibilities so that schools have a little more autonomy. And then I got to the superintendent level. I worked my way in different positions in the district office, and in the 80s was offered a position as the superintendent, and I realized then what it means to be part of a bureaucracy, of a subsystem, a system of subsystems, and how irrevocably complex all of the interlocking decisions and decision makers are. So I'm still searching for how in the world we create the kinds of conditions that great teachers deserve.
So you said that you ended up in this role, but you were a teacher to begin with.
I was.
Did you grow up wanting to be a teacher? Did you go to school to be a teacher, and then you kind of found yourself now in these leadership roles? What was your game plan, kind of always going to be a teacher, or did you even fall into that position? You planned something else?
So I majored in political science. My grandfather thought that wasn't a wise choice. He wasn't sure that one could do something. And in those days, we went to college for 4 years and we got out in 4 years. That was the deal, if we were fortunate enough to go. And so he suggested I major in education as well as whatever else I wanted to major in. And that then created the opportunity that was just readily available when I was waiting for my husband to get back from deployment overseas.
Okay. How do you think, since you've been a teacher before and you oversee a school district now, what's the biggest change in education since you were in the classroom that stands out to you?
So there are a lot of changes, but I would say the one that I find most painful is the amount of respect that I had as a teacher when I first started teaching, and the amount of respect that I often sense that our teachers receive today. You know, the pay has always been low, the working conditions challenging, but the value of teachers perhaps hasn't changed, but the perception is certainly that it's changed a great deal. I did not endure the kind of unprofessional and discourteous treatment that I see a lot of our teachers go through when they make a particularly difficult decision.
Wow. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, and I wonder what contributed to that. Is maybe it's this culture of social media where everyone can have a platform and be critical, or I don't know. I don't know if there's an answer.
Yeah.
But I'm the daughter of 2 South Carolina educators, so I do. They have also faced some of the challenges that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But they've been in the business for a long time.
Yeah.
They love what they do, so it's worth it to them.
Now, I think another big change that should be mentioned is this the focus on the achievement tests. When I first started teaching, we had achievement tests, and we used those tests to try to decide what we had taught well, what we needed to teach better, and which, as children moved on, which children needed what skills retaught. But there wasn't the sort of pressure on the whole system around once-a-year achievement tests that exists today. I hope that that part gets better over time as people begin to see that achievement tests aren't actually measuring well all of the rich human interactions that occur between teachers and children.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's certainly something that's been coming into the conversation lately when we talk about the pandemic. And I feel like a lot of teachers have said that if we didn't have to do, they're talking about standardized tests in general at the end of the year. That whole, they say it takes up a lot of their time. And so there's kind of been a push we've seen, especially in the context of the pandemic when so much time was lost. Teachers are saying this is more crucial than ever, and we'll have to kind of wait and see if we get the waivers.
Right.
I think I read that you went to West Virginia University.
I did.
Did you grow up in West Virginia?
I was graduated from high school in West Virginia, and was enamored with an athlete who was going to go to school in West Virginia. So that's the choice I made at the time. And I had a really great experience there. I had professors from all over the country who were, I felt, really quite demanding. I've read that sometimes that school's been rated as a party school. I must say I never found that to be the case, but yes, I did.
Okay. What do you remember about your early years going to school in West Virginia? I mean, still part of the Southeast. How do you think it's different from how the education system kind of works here in South Carolina? Or I don't know if you can say that because you're a child going through the system. But.
So I remember feeling loved and cared for by teachers. I remember teachers having high expectations. I remember my parents having extraordinarily high expectations, and that it all being a fabric, a part of the community. The social events of the community were often organized around the school. That's where most of the opportunities existed. There weren't a lot of chances for children to have dance or private drama or art lessons or participate in very many clubs outside of school. So the school was the social hub of the community when I was growing up. I think that's probably true across the country, whereas today families are pulled in so many different directions because there's just so much to do, and many parents feel pressured to get their child into everything and through everything.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask, because we've been talking about the pandemic, we've been jumping around a little bit between your life and what you do now, but they're connected. And when we talk about the pandemic, I mean, the school district all school districts have just a monumental challenge ahead of them. Everyone knows, it's not going to be easy, and there are no perfect answers.
Right.
I think that is kind of where we're at, unfortunately.
Right.
But I remember just from my previous reporting is that even before the pandemic, Charleston County schools were poised to undergo some really big changes this school year anyways. And these are ones that were finalized at the end of last year. Not without some pushback from parents who were pretty passionate on both sides.
Right.
So I was really curious when I sat down with you. I wanted to talk about how is the district grappling with these two big things, the pandemic as well as all of these changes that the district made, with the effort to, behind all of them is to try and improve outcomes for some of the students who are just not doing as well as their peers, to increase diversity and equity for all students. Those are changes that, you've said time and time again, can't wait. We needed to make them, and we need to make them now. But now you have a global pandemic on your hands, and learning loss and all of these things. Are you worried that because of that, some of the changes that might overshadow some of the hard work that was put into making these controversial changes a while back? And how are those intersecting now when you look at where the school district is going moving forward?
That's a really interesting question. For the most part, the major changes that the board was attempting to make have been put in place. We were able to get most of that work done. And the interesting thing is that the disagreements, the discourse that we were engaged in with the community around which approach might be better, paled in comparison to the common challenge we all face now with COVID-19. So I think as we all reflect on the debates we were having in November, December, January, we realize that those were pretty minor in comparison to the challenges we now face. So in some ways, the work has been delayed a little. In other ways, the need for the work has been magnified because we see just split open for everyone to view. The events of the past 4 or 5 months have helped everyone see the extent of the inequity that exists, the injustice that we still sometimes knowingly, but often unknowingly or unwittingly live with or are part of. So I honestly believe that in the end, the need for the changes is more visible to everyone, but the challenges of addressing the problems are now exacerbated.
Absolutely. We've talked about this before, and I know that there is no easy answer, but I'm curious if you've thought about, as someone who's been here for 5 years, but a lot of these problems have existed, long before that. Do you ever think to yourself, how do we get here? How do we get to the point where we know that some students are not being served as well as their peers, and what contributes to that? And that's a really hard question, I know, but I'm curious where you think that happened, I guess, along the line.
Yeah, I find it an interesting question. History tells us that from the beginning of time, wherever one wants to mark that beginning, things were never equal. They were never fair for everyone. There was never a time when all Americans were well educated. If we wanted to take our own country, we have these remembrances of these halcyon days that weren't actually ideal for everyone. And perhaps everyone with whom we went to school was doing fairly well, but everyone wasn't in school. And so it's not as if we had the ideal solutions that we lost somewhere along the way. I think that we're grappling with how to bring more opportunities to people in an ever-changing society. We're moving from an industrial age to an information age where everyone needs to be able to think well in order for our country to stay globally competitive and in order for our people to have a standard of living that's acceptable to them and to our society as a whole in terms of what we say we value. So I think it's just a matter of it's our turn now to pick up the torch and carry it as far as we can. But there are no easy solutions. If there were, they would have been found by the really clever and hardworking people who came before us. So I see it as a living in a period of time where you have an opportunity to continue the journey others started, and hopefully when you stop, you'll have moved the marker a bit.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, especially when you take a historical approach. You know, nothing was created in a vacuum, and you know, we're here for a reason, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Right.
I'm especially going off that, especially curious to hear your thoughts on. We are living, you know, history right now for a myriad of reasons, the pandemic, but also this level of national civil unrest over the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, at the hands of police. So I'm curious, how do you, as an educator and as someone who's oversees education, how does that connect? And because I think some of the frustrations that people have seen are the ones that you know, we acknowledge that education is not always equal for white and black students. And so how do you grapple with that as an educator? Is it a matter of changing the way things are taught, or is your task to do exactly what you tried to do last year and make some of these changes? I don't know if that was actually a well-worded question, but it's like a lot to unpack there, and education does play some role in it, I think.
I think we do. I think that our key role as public education is to prepare citizens, all people, not just citizens these days, but to prepare the American people to participate successfully in a democratic republic. And there are lots of facets of that role. So having decent human beings, kind human beings who share core values is as important as making sure that human beings have the skills and the problem-solving abilities that are essential in such a complex world. So I think that part of the answer is it's always been our core mission. Both the heartbreaking realization that we've had this summer and the opportunities that the painful situations with which people are dealing have presented is that more than ever people realize that we have to get this right. We have to examine our own biases. We have to take seriously our own commitment to be culturally competent, to realize that all of us come to the work with preconceived notions that may be wrong, and that we bring those notions into the classroom with us. And we know enough today from brain science to know that children engage first because they have an emotional reason to do so. Perhaps they have a goal they want to reach, or they feel a relationship with the adult in the room and they want to please. But there's that feeling of belonging and being valued that's at the heart of teaching anyone or helping anyone to learn anything. And that's not a really precise answer, but it's my reflection on the opportunity that lies before us. And I think combined with the school closures, it's coming at a time when virtually everyone has a deeper appreciation for what school teachers do every day and how important it is to get that back online just as safely as we can do so while changing some of the ways that we respond to children and that we prepare for them. They're not fodder going through an assembly line. We've got to find ways to respond more appropriately, and simply offering 180 days of instruction a year delivered in a particular way is not going to get us there. When we come out on the other side of COVID-19, we're going to have to rethink a lot of pieces of our system. There are some children who deserve more education, they deserve more time with teachers, they deserve more supports, and that's the direction in which our board was headed. How do we find fair and yet make sure we honor all the students who are in the system and the hard work that parents have done at every level of the organization. So
it sounds like, so even it's just going to be a period of change. We had these changes approved in December before all this happened. We have the pandemic, and right now it's almost, you get the feeling like we're just trying to stay afloat right now. You're trying to just make sure that we can get kids back as soon as we can safely. But then it sounds like, you know, when you think ahead, the pandemic's not going to last forever.
Right.
It might take a while, but
right.
Whenever we get past that, on the other side of the tunnel, it sounds like there's going to be more changes that need to be made. Ones that might not be easy if we got the same reaction that we did in December.
Right.
But that's interesting to hear that you know, thinking ahead that far down the line, it's like we're going to have to kind of do a whole reevaluation of the system and how it works, and that might mean
right.
more changes.
And I think that's what the crisis gives us an opportunity to do. It has disrupted the system as we knew it. So shame on us if we put it back precisely as it was with the inequities built into it. Mm-hmm. It's an opportunity to make some changes that people won't find so disquieting because the system has already been disrupted in unthinkable way, in ways that were unthinkable to us a year ago, and are probably nothing compared to what some generations before us have faced.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you can speak to this, but do we know if some of the changes, what do we know about some of the changes that we approved in December? Have they worked based on what we know so far? At least some of them. I don't know you can judge all of them yet, but initially at least, are you optimistic that?
I am. Some worked. We know, we have early evidence that some of the changes that the board made regarding the selection of students, or the opportunity for students to participate in particular programs, worked really well, whereas others didn't. At the high school level, we learned it's late to make changes, to open up opportunities. If we haven't prepared children really well in elementary and middle, it's difficult for them to take advantage of opportunities when you open the door at the high school. If you haven't raised the floor as you've lifted the ceiling, we know that some of the changes that we've made in curricular approaches or adding counselors, social and emotional supports for children are working really well. We know the investments in some additional staff have worked extremely well, but it's early days, and we'll have to see longer term. And that's where the kinds of assessments that are useful to teachers and educators are critically important. And we weren't even able to do the assessments that are useful to us, let alone those that policymakers need.
I see. Yeah, I don't envy you right now. I think everyone realizes that. I'll be honest, the position that you're in is really, really tough. And
it is tough, thanks.
Looking to you for guidance, and I don't think any one of us knows all the answers. But yeah. I just, right. This is a wild time.
It is.
To be leading in school right now. So, I think a lot of parents recognize that, and even if they don't agree with the choices that are being made, they recognize that you have a really, really tough job at the moment, for sure. I wanted to sort of circle back. I got sidetracked because I like talking to you about education. That's what I'm passionate about as well. But I always kind of want to circle back to, why you're here and this project. When I think about education, it seems to be almost like it's the female-oriented or female-dominated career. A lot of teachers that I had growing up were women. I think that ratio is slowly starting to shift. But do you think that your gender has played a role in your trajectory and how you got here? Or do you think it created any challenges or any obstacles for you, or any advantages, I guess? I don't know. I'm curious if you spent time to reflect, just when we're talking about this context of the right to vote and giving women that power, come a long way. Be curious if you thought about it, how it might have impacted your life.
So I've never really given it much thought. I was just really fortunate to grow up in circumstances where it didn't occur to me that I couldn't do whatever job needed to be done. I grew up in a family that emphasized work ethic. They emphasized service to others. They emphasized doing one's best. And apparently teachers, the professors, the early administrators I worked for as a teacher, I never made gender an issue. So it just didn't occur to me, really, ever, that gender was an issue or it should be an issue. Now, after I became a superintendent and attended my first national conference, I realized there were almost no women there. So I did some research, and across the country, there were about 17,000 school districts at that time. 2% of those school districts were led by women and 98% by men. So I think that what happened at one time, this is my own conjecture, not based on research, but women and other minorities had two ways into the workforce, that through medicine as nurses, or through education as teachers, or the ministry hadn't opened up much to women yet. And so the teaching force at that time was dominated by these incredibly capable women who were so talented and could have done any number of other things, but society wasn't necessarily thinking in those terms or most women weren't thinking in those terms at that time. Plus, eventually, when teachers were allowed to teach and be pregnant, at one time they had to quit when they became pregnant. But after teachers were able to teach and have children, it was a good profession that allowed one to combine motherhood and working. So there were lots of women in the profession. Very few of them were administrators. But if I noticed that, I don't recall. I was really inspired by a woman principal that I had when I worked in the inner city of Pittsburgh in a school that was organized for children who didn't do well in public schools. The principal of that school was a woman, and she was just so inspiring at the way she solved problems, or was thoughtful, listened to everyone. And I think that's when it first occurred to me that maybe that was something that I could do as well. So it was that experience with her as a role model, along with my never ever having been told that there were any limitations, and my conviction that surely there was a better way to organize these decisions that classroom teachers are having to start the day with, that caused me to get a master's in education administration. So,
one of the last questions that I wanted to ask you, as we reflect on the 19th Amendment and on all of these other things that on gender and being a woman of power, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on something that I've kind of reflected on, that we hear sometimes in the media, or we hear if we're talking to a colleague. A lot of women have said recently, that they feel like maybe because of their gender, if they're trying to take on a role of power in their workplace, they feel like they are more likely to be criticized or to be called bossy, compared to maybe a man in a similar position would be called taking charge. And so there's this almost seems to be a double standard for women of power sometimes. And I say recently because I think a lot of times women have only become comfortable sort of speaking out about it and sharing their experiences. So I'm curious if that's something that you've thought about, because I know with some of these hard decisions that have been made, there's been vocal critics, and I just, as well as vocal supporters as well, but curious if you've thought about that at all, and I hope it hasn't, you haven't felt that way, but especially I just wanted to ask, considering this this relevant conversation that we're having,
right?
And it can be awkward about gender and the role that it plays, I suppose. Do you feel like that is the case for you, or have you felt that way before, I suppose?
So I would say two things about that. One, when you look around and find that you've been given an opportunity to do things that others who are like you haven't been given, you feel a responsibility to do it really well, not to let people down. And so I don't know that, sometimes we say we have to work harder. I'd never felt I had to work harder. I just didn't want to let people down once they'd given me a chance to do something. I'm not sure that that was associated with gender. And I've been around a long time. I've been in education 50-some years, and it is, dealing with other people's children is hard. You're hitting people's hearts every single time you suggest making a change. And I personally can't say that I've seen women being treated any worse than I've seen men treated who try to make changes to a system that favors some children over other children. And if you are coming from a household that's favored, you're often not even aware how much the system is working in your favor until someone suggests changing it. And so I understand I almost always understand the responses. Sometimes the criticism is unwarranted and comes from a place I can't understand and don't want to spend much time thinking about. But I have not ever honestly felt as though it was gender related. Or if I have, I don't recall it now. But no, I think it just comes with the territory. When you're trying to change social institutions that have worked really well for some people and not well at all for others, and you're upsetting the equilibrium, there are bound to be people, both those for whom you're trying to make things better and those who fear their children might be disadvantaged by any changes you're making, who are upset, and it simply goes with the job. So change is hard. If it weren't that hard and uncomfortable, if people didn't make you miserable, it would have happened a long time ago. It just takes a lot of courage. And I think that the thing that people don't understand about leaders is how much stamina it takes, how much determination, how much we have to be sensitive to other people's needs, but tough as nails when it comes to our core principles and values, and the clarity around what it is we're trying to do for whom, at what cost. So I don't think, for me, that that's been gender related.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with me. Is there anything else that I didn't ask that you want to end on, or that you want to cover, or have we kind of run the gambit? But you're welcome if you wanted to add anything else.
Thank you. I really can't think of anything. I am just an ordinary person, and I really am often sort of nonplussed with interview questions because I'm not quite sure how to answer myself. I just am the most common, ordinary person. I'm not very interesting at all. I just love what I do, and I hope that comes through ultimately. Even at the end of all the controversy, people can say, well, we never doubted her sincerity.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again. I really do appreciate your time, and it was great to learn more about you.
Thanks. It was really, I had no idea your parents were both educators. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Well, it explains why you're such a quick study on so many things.